In today's video, I'm showing you 2 recycling upcycles projects that I made from things from my recycling bin. For my first project, I'm using an empty I can't believe it's not butter tub. Now, I decided to paint this with a paint technique that I saw on TikTok. I also saw it on Julie's Signs and Designs. Basically, you add baking soda to chalk paint and it makes a really nice textured paint on your object. So I mixed the paint using a 1-to-1 ratio. I did actually wind up going back and adding a little more paint because I felt like maybe I didn't get the ratio quite right. It was a little thick and I wanted it to be a little thinner. This is really, it's not a science. It's definitely getting it to the texture that you prefer. This video is part of the Useful DIY Challenge hosted by Mom Does Life Handmade. This month, her co-host is Shoshana by Regal Designs by Shoshana. I will link both channels as well as a playlist in my description box below. And once I had the paint mixed the way I wanted it to be, I gave my little tub 2 coats of paint. Now, this was a total splurge. I bought these IOD stamps. They are not cheap, but I am thoroughly enjoying them. If you don't have these, you could definitely use like a little cow stamp or some other stamp that you have, or even some kind of transfer. So with the IOD stamps, the instructions say to sand the design side of them with a very fine grit sandpaper before you use them for the first time, and this conditions the stamp. And then they said, if you have to pull hard on the stamp to get it off, that's okay. So I wanted to show you, in case you decide to buy these, I'll link them in my description box below. I have no affiliation. But you really do have to pull hard on them the first time you take them off of the little thing that they come on, and they don't rip. And then I grabbed my Stays On ink. Stays On is a product I have used for probably about 20 years. And basically it's awesome ink. You can stamp it on anything and it stays on. You can even use it on ceramics. And so I got my Stays On and I patted it onto my stamp. So you want to put the ink onto the stamp rather than dipping the stamp onto the ink pad. This prevents excess ink from getting on edges so that you don't have any like shadowing that happens. And then stamping on the butter tub was a little tricky because it wasn't a super solid surface. The plastic was a little bendy. So this first stamp didn't come out the best. But you know, anytime you're using a new thing, practice makes perfect. So the second side came out much better. But I'm just pressing it down, trying to get a good transfer of the ink. And you can see when I pull it up, it's not complete. So then I went ahead and repeated the process to do the second side. And this time I had kind of learned my lesson. So this time I actually pressed the butter tub up. So I kind of pinched the 2 surfaces together, and that helped the ink transfer to be a little bit more complete in the areas where the plastic would have been down from pressing. So this was a better stamp. Now, I made another mistake. I should have let my Stays On dry a little longer, because you'll see here I come back with my brown wax, and then the wax was fine, but then you use a slightly, very, very slightly dampened rag to wipe it off. And when I did that, the ink smeared a little bit. Now, this is a very like rustic craft, so that's okay. But if you decided to do something like this with an ink stamp, just let your ink dry a little longer before you do anything to the surface. And in this project, a very lightly dampened rag is your best friend, because if the wax gets a little heavy in any area, you can just wipe it away so that you make your project a little more white. Then I neglected to record this part, but I did give it a top coat of this Craft Smart. It's basically like watered down Mod Podge. So if you had Mod Podge, that would be fine too. And then I measured out a block of flour foam, and I just stuck that into my little tub. Now, I didn't glue it right away because I wasn't convinced at this point that this is what I wanted to do. Like, I wanted to arrange the florals first and see if I liked it, and then if I liked it, I would glue it down. So that's why I didn't glue it right away. But once I got all the boxwood in there, I decided that I did like it, and so I just put a little dot of hot glue in there and just stuck the whole thing in. And then I was going to use Spanish moss to cover any foam that was showing, but there really wasn't much showing, so I decided to just leave it alone. And then I wrapped twine around the top of the little tub, I think 3 times, and tied a bow, and then used a little drop of hot glue to glue it in place. And here's the finished product. I really love the baking soda added to the chalk paint. You could use that on so many different objects to make cute decor pieces. I know this is the useful DIY challenge, so my next project is a very useful object in my home, not just decor. This is my trash that I'm going to make into a holder for my bird food. I love to feed the birds, and the container that I have is not big enough, and I thought this will be perfect. So the first thing I'm going to do is soak this and try to get the label off as best as I can, but we'll see. Oh, maybe it'll come off. I'll let you know what happens. I soaked the pretzel container for several hours and got a lot of the label off, but for the glue residue, I did wind up using Goo Gone, and that worked like a charm. This project was inspired by something I saw on a channel called Flea Market Rescue. I'll link it in my description box. Now, in her project, she did not paint her containers first. I didn't remember that when I was doing this. I painted my pretzel container first before I put this clay on the front. I probably shouldn't have done that. Glue, and I assume clay, will adhere better to an unpainted surface. Now, it didn't really cause me any problems, but I think if I were to do this again, I probably wouldn't paint the pretzel container first. So I put my clay on the front of my pretzel container, and this is going to be where I'm going to use one of my IOD stamps to stamp sort of a label onto the container. And basically I just applied the clay, and then I feathered out the edges. If you can see, like, I'm using my fingers to make the edges really thin so that there's not like a big lip between the clay and the surface of the container. And I got the IOD stamp that I wanted to use, and I just placed it onto the clay, and I used this plastic piece that they give you to kind of be able to press onto the stamp without it sticking to my finger. So I'm just trying to get a really good stamp into the surface of that clay. And then I pull the stamp up, and you can see the impression that is left behind. Then I grabbed another chunk of clay and I just kind of worked it into a little roll of sorts. And basically what I'm making here is a little handle that I'm going to attach to the lid of my jar. Now, it will not be a functional handle, but my kids aren't going to use this birdseed container. It's just going to be me. And I just wanted it there to be a little more decorative. So basically I kind of flattened it out. And then I'm not attaching it here. I'm just making sure that I get the dimensions right and the angles right. And so I was just bending it until I liked the way that it looked. And then I used a little bit of water on my finger just to smooth out any like cracks or imperfections that had appeared when I rolled out the clay, just to make it look a little smoother. Then paper clay takes a long time to dry. You're supposed to leave it 1 to 3 days, or you can use the oven and a hairdryer. So you put it in a cold oven and put the oven to between 2 and 225, I think the instructions say. And you do that for 15 to 20 minutes. You have to be very careful not to scorch it. But when it comes out, that's what it looks like. And I had also used my hairdryer to dry the label. Then I used the same baking soda chalk paint mixture to paint another coat onto my container. I was careful not to get any big blobs of paint into my stamped on label. To get a really nice, more textured look, I didn't let that chalk paint baking soda mixture completely dry before I brushed on a little bit more paint. And so you're actually moving some of the partially drying paint, and it just makes a very cool, chunky texture. Then I got my Art Minds antique wax this time, And I basically used the same technique here as I did on the first project, but I made sure to get some of the wax into the stamp. And so I'm just using my damp rag to wipe away the excess so that it will leave the stamp readable. And then, of course, I did the same thing all over the textured surface of the pretzel jar. And then I used E6000 and hot glue to attach my handle to the lid. Now, I was careful not to mix the glues. I was told you should not let your glues mix, so I was careful not to let them mix. But I just put like a dot of hot glue on each side and then a dot of E6000. Now, I did make another mistake here. I should not have painted my lid first because glue likes to stick better to a unpainted surface. So if I were to do this again, I would wait until my handle was glued on and then paint the whole thing at one time. Here is the completed project. I love it so much. I think it's just really pretty and goes really well in my kitchen, you can see. Here's my giant bag of birdseed. Funny story, it doesn't all fit, so I'm gonna have to eat some more pretzels so that I can make another one of these. And that's all that I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed these recycling upcycles. Maybe they give you some ideas of things that you can do with trash that you might be throwing away. Thanks so much for watching. Please go ahead and check out the playlist as well as Mom Das and Shoshana's channels, and I'll see you in my next video. Take care.